The 17th of December, 1944, in Belgium, the Ardennes Forest. Oberf author Hans Müller squished in his cold foxhole and wrote in his notebook things that would stay with him forever. Life. People in the U.S. are not like people in Russia. Their weapons are completely different. It's not the amount of fire, even though that's already awful. It's the speed. It's about being exact. It's the understanding that you can't do anything else. There is quiet for a moment. Then the world goes off the next second. In the thick fog of that morning, Mueller had saw something that broke every assumption German troops had about how strong the American military was. His Hitler's last chance to win in the West had just begun with a company from the 6th SS Panzer Army. What they had done complete surprise against American views that aren't held very strongly. It looked like victory was close. After that, their guns found them. There was something Mueller didn't know that no German soldier moving through those snow-covered woods could have known they were about to face the deadliest weapon system ever used in battle. A system that was so powerful, so harmful, and so accurate, planned so well that it would stop Germany's last attack and show how strong the American military really is. Of being better. The fall began a long time before the Battle of the Bulge. In the years 1943 and 1944, German soldiers who had been on the Eastern Front were sent to Italy, France, and the Low Countries to fight American forces. They brought with them ideas that were formed in desperate fights against Soviet artillery. They knew how to stay alive. Russian bombings caused a hard-won experience. Russian snipers would fire at German troops, giving them a chance to attack. Important seconds to find cover. The shells would come in regular patterns, which let people move between barges. It took 10 to 15 minutes for the fire to move from observation to effect. The Americans were very, very different from the British. Gapa Otto Schmidt was taken in May by the Afrika Korps in Tunisia. He had served for 2 years on the Eastern Front. 1943 would later talk about his first meeting with American guns in a talk with. We were set up in a wadi north of Tunis. We thought it was a good cover. Who are they? That's how long it would have taken them to find us and then range their guns. We were sure it was safe to heat our breakfast coffee. We saw it after that. A small plane that's not much bigger than a spy plane putting above at about 500 meters height. We didn't really pay attention. Such planes did not have any guns. We thought it was taking pictures. After 3 minutes, the entire wadi exploded with no warning, no ranging shots, and no other clear sign at all. Bombs going off at the same time, not one after the other. There are bursts of air above us and land below us. In just 30 seconds, my group stopped being a fighting unit. Out of the 123 guys who died, I was one of only 11. The airplane Schmidt had seen a L-4 Grasshopper, which is the type of plane used by American forward observers. These simple Piper Cubs, the German forces would fear this plane more than any other. Not because of the tools they had, but because of what happened next. The way they look. The German troops found out a painful truth. When you saw a grasshopper in the sky, you had minutes, or maybe even seconds, to stand where you were before. American gunfire turned it into a killing zone. Latent. Friedrich Bauer wrote about his experiences as an artillery officer who led counter-battery fire on the Eastern Front. Shocked in letters found in German military files many years later. I learned about American weapons procedures from papers that were captured. At first, I thought these papers were lies and propaganda meant to scare people. There is no way that the outlined artillery system could work. The planning that was needed. It's not possible. Then I saw it for myself. Near Sinjo, an MRT insect showed up. We found it and got ready to move our guns, which is what we always do. Before we could, American moved, before we could even figure out firing data for counter-battery fire. Our position was being hit by shells. Not random fire, not covering a large area. Exact fire from each gun. They had figured out how to fire, planned, more than one battery at different ranges, and fired all at once in less time than it took us to move forward. Radio maps will help our watchers find the center of our fire's direction. How to? The American artillery was better not because of a single new idea, but because of a whole system that combined many new ideas. Germany could never meet their level of technology, training, and industrial power. What set it off was the fire. a new way of using weapons called direction center, where German artillery batteries calculated their own firing methods. All of the info from the American batteries was sent to a central fire direction center. That could make dozens of batteries fire at the same time. The FDC method used pre-calculated places to shoot. In companies all over the U.S., rooms were full of women using mechanical calculators. Slide rules and logarithm tables are used to find firing solutions for all possible combinations of factors. Speed and direction of the wind, weather, humidity, barrel wear, and propellant temperature and height differences between the object and the gun. These desks, written in books small enough to fit in a map case, helped American fire direction officers figure out exact you-can-fire answers in minutes instead of hours. A headman named Vera Hoffman, a math professor who was forced to join the Wehrmacht artillery, looked at stolen American firing tables after the battle. His analysis, which was kept in German military papers, showed that shocked admiration. Years of computer work went into making these tables, a huge amount of time on computers that use metal. They had figured out answers for all of our variables, could run into in the field. Compared to those, our shooting ranges were not very good. Each job needs a lot of calculations to be done in the field. What the U.S. had done the math ahead of time. They just looked up the answer in the field, but tables alone couldn't explain how devastatingly well American weapons worked. What really changed things was time on target, a very advanced way of shooting that only a few countries were able to use. Now organized artillery fire at a target, which everyone calls toot-T, so that multiple batteries shot their shells at different times depending on how far away they were from the target. All of the shells arrived at the same time, during a 3-second window. The result was terrible. The German troops had no warning. There were no long-range shots or slow builds-up of fire. For 1 second, there was silence. Afterwards, instant, dozens of shells going off at the same time. With troops out in the open, they had to drop face down at the first explosion of conventional gunfire in order to stay alive, so they didn't have time to answer. Research done after the war showed that 66% of artillery in the first few seconds of a barrage, people were hurt. Time on track increased deaths by removing warnings. Stabsfeld, Kurt Zimmerman, a soldier who lived through toot hits during the Battle of the Bulge, wrote in his diary found by American troops in a command post they had taken. It's not what we normally think of as weapons. It's new things. You don't hear anything. After that, the world stops. Each shell comes in the same second. Men who would have lived through ground bursts die in air bursts. The men who would have lived through air bursts die in ground bursts. There isn't any time to run for safety, get to a hole, or duck, to even fall flat. You are just living 1 second and hurt or dead the next. Commanders in Germany were shocked by how quickly American weapons responded. German weaponry was thought to be some of the world's best, could set fire to something in 8 to 10 minutes if everything went perfectly. The American artillery could usually shoot accurately in 3 minutes, this speed resulting from several causes. New FM radios were used by American forward monitors. That made conversation clear, static-free, and easy. German troops still mostly used AM radios, which had problems like interfering with. There were also a lot more radios in the United States. Every battalion of troops had. There are several forward monitors with radios. Most German companies had 1 or 2 radios, which they often shared between groups. The forward monitors were actually another American good thing. German forward monitors were artillery officers who often didn't have enough training or skill as an infantryman. American forward watchers were people who had special training and who knew how to use both artillery and infantry methods. They moved with army groups, they lived with infantry troops and coordinated fire as a normal part of operations involving both types of weapons. In addition, not just their own company, but the whole corps artillery could be called upon by American artillery observers. One forward observer could quickly arrange fire from dozens of batteries with this system. If an officer calls for help with fire, it could bring down the weight of metal equal to a small airstrike, delivered more quickly and more correctly than any air support could. Austin Rick Muller, in charge, about an infantry company that was destroyed near Eslo in July 1944, proved this. Ability in his last report, there was only one American rifle company in my whole regiment was held in a town for 6 hours. Every time we tried to As they attacked, gunfire pushed us back. Not just one battery, but what looked like a bunch of them. The A-forward observer in that company, most likely a left renter or captain, was in charge of more guns than I could. Use all of my regimental weapons to attack. More than 400 men died while trying to sack 120 Americans. We failed. The gun pieces themselves showed American industry is better than others. Most people use the M2A1 105mm cannon. This piece of American light cannon was a work of engineering and manufacturing genius. Rock Island Arsenal had gotten better at ways for making things that let them be made quickly and to exact specifications. By 8,536 M2A1 howitzers had been made by the end of World War II. The 36 howitzers in the American Infantry Division were split into 3 groups of 12 guns each. These both sides of the companies had cars and were pulled behind by trucks or half-tracks that could go at highway speeds. Moving away from one, it took German horse-drawn artillery 2 to 3 hours to move from one firing point to another. It only took American motorized artillery 1 hour, 20 to 30 minutes on a battery. The difference in movement was very clear. The German guns. During the war, most transportation stayed on horses. Nazi propaganda showed panzers that were powered by machines. Approximately 80% of drones from German motor power were based on horses for moving things. Germany had 514,000 soldiers when World War II began. Horses, and by February 1945, there were 1,198,000 left. It took hours to limber, move, and unlimber each piece of German weaponry, which took 6 to 8 horses, or conditions in the winter. It became almost impossible to move. Grief writer Paul Richter was sent to work for a German gun company. Battery in Normandy kept an in-depth journal that was found after the war. We looked at, during a fight, American artillery was moved around. After firing their mission, cars showed up. In 20 minutes, the whole group had loosened their guns and left. We needed at least 2 hours to do the same evolution, and that meant the roads and weather were good. We might need 4 in the mud or the fire. Hours. The Americans would move to a new spot and get ready to fire again, before we were done moving. We were having a war with horses in the 1800s, in a war from the 20th century with cars as the enemy. The result was bound to happen. Even more deadly firepower came from American 155mm howitzers. Each different battalion had 12 155mm howitzers. These guns are firing 43-kilogram shells to ranges of more than 14,000 meters, gave the division leader a strong punch that can destroy defenses that would be able to withstand fire from smaller calibers. The 155mm was in and of itself a technical marvel. It was designed in the late 1930s and made standard in May 1941. Its range, precision, and dependability. During the war, 10,300 were made. The A truck or half-track could pull the gun along at highway speeds, which would allow it to be moved quickly. The rate of fire was 4 rounds per minute, though crews that were well-trained could quickly go 6 rounds per minute. But even these divisions on top of the weaponry that is available at the Corps and Army levels. The American main guns, usually, it had companies of 155mm guns, 8-inch howitzers, and even huge 240mm guns. Whatitzers. These tools, which can destroy any defense, could be forward monitors at the battalion level, have asked for help. Because of the pyramiding of weapons, there was only one rifle company, could quickly put out fire from the divisional corps, and even the Army a battery. The German artillery, on the other hand, was very well planned. Army and CPS artillery had its own commands and couldn't help with divisional actions without a lot of work. Coordination and approval by more than one center. The German infantry units had their own guns, but to fire from corps weapons, requests had to go through the division and then to corps. This process often took hours. Yes, please. When the fire came, if it came at all, American mobile. The front line of the war had changed. Lieutenant Joachim Weber, a forward spotter who had asked for corps artillery support during the Normandy battle, and wrote down how frustrated he was. I called for main guns. At 9 a.m., the enemy was getting ready to attack our position by gathering tanks. I gave accurate coordinates, described the target, and talked about the situation on the battlefield. At 13:30, 4 hours after some time, I finally got fire. 3 shots. At that point, the American tanks had finished their attack and pulled back. Our place was taken over. I only made it through by luck. The weapons that could have saved us got here too late to make a difference. The high level of technical complexity of American the ammo was part of the artillery. Even though Germany had trouble with fuel shortages and, in addition to making shells, American businesses sent seemingly endless amounts of ammo to exact details that made sure the work would always be done right. Even more importantly, the variable time fuse, or VT fuse, was a great piece of technology that clear-cut. The VT fuse, which is also known as the proximity fuse, had a small radar sender and receiver are built into the front of the gun shell. A radio signal was sent out by the sender. The mirrored signal set off the explosion when the shell got close to the ground or anything else. Because of this, a shell that went off at the best height for killing the most people, usually 10 to 20 meters above the ground. The VT fuse changed how well weapons worked. Time switches that work normally needed to figure out the exact time to target and then set the fuse to that time. Wind, weather, and barrel wear all changed how long a shell flew. Even little, because of mistakes, shells either went off too high or buried themselves in the ground before they could go off. The VT fuse. Getting rid of these factors ensured the best airburst no matter what the conditions were. The VT fuse had been used in battle by the USS Helena on January 5, 1943, to shoot down a Japan bombed off Guadalcanal with just 2 or 3 salvos. VT bombs were used in 1943 and 1944. Showed to be very powerful in naval anti-aircraft tactics and against V-1 bombing England from the sky. Of course, worries about the technology falling, it could not be used as field artillery over Europe after it fell into German hands. General Dwight Eisenhower asked directly approval to use VT fuses during the Battle of the Bulge, saying that their effectiveness made the extra security worth it. Risk. At first, the Pentagon said no, but Eisenhower strongly objected. Formal permission came on December 19 through December 21, 1944, not long after. The German attack started. This was the first time VT fuses were used against groundmen in the theater in Europe. The choice turned out to be right. VT fuse shells German units that were caught in the open during the 8 Ardennes were destroyed. Not nice. Naval tests against airplanes had shown that VT fuses were 3 to 4 times more powerful than regular fuses at stopping V-1 moving bombs. Switch VT, 79% of all things that came at it were destroyed. There were 3,000 pieces that could kill. Square feet instead of 60 square feet for regular fuses. A few guesses it was suggested that VT fuses made artillery 200 to 700% more efficient. Soldiers who knew how to avoid being hit by regular weapons by looking for any holes in the ground found that VT fuses canceled out that cover. The shells went off above them and fell down, with dangerous pieces that hit men lying down in shallow holes and killed them. Ober-author Hans Müller lived through a VT fuse barrage and wrote about it in his log, which was the starting point of this story. We knew on the Eastern Front to fall apart at the first blast. Even small depressions could protect from pieces moving side to side. But these shells, these monster shells as we called them, blew up above us. It was like rain as the pieces fell. Men who should have been safe in foxholes were killed by falling bits of metal. There was no response. We didn't have time to dig deep bunkers, though. We just died. The mental effects of VT fuses were worse than their physical effects. German troops were trained to deal with cannon that was looking for cover, thought their training didn't matter. The fact that no cover falls short of overhead cover would keep them from being paralyzed. Some units wouldn't leave your defense positions, even if you were told to, because moving out in the open meant certain death if you were an American. They were hit by fire. Friedrich Bauer was helped to write about a nearly failed mutiny in his unit in the last few weeks of the Ardennes attack. It was told to my company to hit an American position, about 300 meters away. The men said no. They had seen what the U.S. shells could do with Cumbrous and these new bombs that blew in the open with troops' air. I tried to tell them that if we didn't attack, we would die anyway, that the U.S. would finally take over. Where we stand, the men wouldn't move. They would rather risk being caught than know for sure they would die under fire from American guns. American artillery and ammo were made in such large quantities that the numbers showed another aspect of German soldiers' superiority. Couldn't understand. Just Rock Island Arsenal made more than 10,000 the howitzers. 155 millimeter howitzers and heavier weapons were made in many companies. Weapons. During the war, the production of shells hit unbelievable levels. Allied bombing, lack of resources, and inefficient use of industrial space all slowed down German output. Never got close to American levels of power. Pieces of German weapons they were often better designed than American versions, but Germany didn't make enough of them, and didn't have the factories to keep making things while the war went on. It was 1944 when German fire. Batteries often only worked at half power because guns were broken or worn out and there were no spares. Read more. Importantly, German ammunition production could not keep up with activities that were very busy. German artillery positions often only had a small amount of shells to use each day, sometimes just 2 or 3. Every gun every day. There were no such rules for American batteries. Forward observers knew they could call for fire without worrying about running out of ammo. The Leutnant Werner Vogel, a German artillery officer, wrote about the lack of ammunition in his war notebook. We got 50 shells for each gun, for the whole week. 50 shells to help an infantry company that is under constant attack by the Americans. I was needed to defend every fire mission to the battalion, explaining why this specific target was worth the money spent. Unreplaceable weapons of war. At the same time, American guns fired thousands of shells every day with no care for the environment. We fought against rich people in a poor man's war, man's enemy. The difference in the amount of ammunition available showed up in tactical strategy. German artillery strategy stressed heavy fire on important targets that could only be reached after careful planning and approval. The American policy stressed responding fire right away, ready to help with infantry actions. A leader of an American infantry platoon. Within minutes, they could ask for and get artillery assistance. If he has to, a German platoon leader might have to wait hours for fire, getting any at all. The logistics of getting ammunition to soldiers made the U.S.'s benefits even clearer. The American cannon was fully motorized and fueled by truck convoys that could bring thousands of shells to the front lines. Places within a day. German artillery, which was pulled by horses and often relied on rail travel for long-distance movement, had a hard time keeping enough forward stocks. As air power from the Allies blocked rail networks, it got harder and harder to get ammo. American standardization was also good for operations. The 105mm howitzers fired the M1 shell. Rounds fired by 155mm howitzers and bigger guns used the same fuse. This uniformity made supply easier, cut down on the need for inventory, and made sure there were always fuses on hand. German ammunition output, which was hampered by different fuse designs and caliber variants, had long-term shortages of certain parts, even though total production stayed the same. Good enough. The strength of American artillery led to a chain reaction, the German choices for strategy. German leaders knew that putting a lot of troops together would lead to deadly artillery fire. Spread out their units. But units that were spread out lacked fighting power and could be piecemeal was lost. Concentrated forces could make battle power, but U.S. artillery fires at these sites. Either choice would have lost. Is the Ardennes Germany's last big attack in the West? The offensive showed these trends. With a harsh clarity, fog and cloudy weather were important for German plans to stop the U.S. air power from working. The planners were right when they said that American planes could not fly in bad weather. They didn't get that American weapons didn't need good weather to work. During the first few days of On the Attack, German armored and infantry divisions made big gains against American forces that were caught off guard. Forces. Germany sent more than 200,000 soldiers and about 1,000 tanks to start them. The first attack happened on December 16, 1944. Then American guns found them. German horse-drawn artillery units were destroyed because they couldn't move quickly when they came under fire. Place. Because they didn't have enough ammo to keep firing back, the German guns stopped firing while the American guns kept firing. Werner Stabsfeld and Kurt Zimmermann, whose The Difference was written down in a diary that goes into great depth about German artillery operations during the Bulge, or the battery was in the woods south of St. Vith. Each gun had 50 ammo, our whole budget for the job. We fired a mission to help our troops, American in 10 minutes. An attack from the other side damaged 3 of our 6 guns and killed most of the horses. We tried to move the one, still had guns, but they didn't have any horses to move them. We put down the guns and walked away. This was how things went across the whole front. Our artillery was stopped, but the American cannon kept firing non-stop. In Basau, the U.S., due to a lack of supplies, artillery ammo could only fire 10 rounds per gun per day on December 22nd. Even so, American artillery was very effective at stopping German strikes around the surrounded town. As soon as the weather got better after Christmas, the gunfire got a lot stronger. During the whole Battle of the Bulge, 4,155 in all, 1,255,000 military rounds were fired by American guns. In the German units they got 50 kilometers into American lines and were stuck, surrounded by once they got more supplies, American troops could call on unlimited artillery support. John Heinrich Müller-Obus, his regiment had been wiped out at St. Lo 6 months before the Bulge, but he was in charge of a new regiment during it. His last report, which he wrote in a jail camp after being captured in January 1945, gives a harsh evaluation. Our defeat came from American artillery before it came from American troops or shields. Their airplanes and guns watched every move we made and fired at us. All of your energy of forces was broken up by artillery fire before we could charge. Every line of defense was broken by artillery before their troops attacked on foot. We couldn't move, gather, or protect ourselves. We simply took shelling from weapons until we were no longer a useful force. They were going to drive through to it. Took less than a week for Antwerp and the split Allied forces to stop moving. By gunfire from the U.S., units that went on the offensive with full strength finished it with 30 to 40% casualties. Most of the casualties were caused by gunfire. The things that German soldiers who lived through the war was already over when the artillery arrived. People who were taken and sent to U.S. prisoner of war camp states learned that the American weapons system that had destroyed their units was only one part of the American military combat strength. The factories that could make tens of thousands of gun pieces and millions of making tanks, planes, trucks, and everything else used the same amount of shells. Weapon of war in huge numbers that were far greater than what Germany could make. Writer of grief Schmidt was arrested in Tunisia and is being held in a camp in Texas. He wrote an AA letter that got through American security. I have seen American business. I saw hundreds of trains carrying artillery pieces moving toward ports so they could be sent away. I've seen companies make thousands of shells at a time. The United States they didn't beat us by better tactics or braver troops, even though their tactics were good and their soldiers were brave. We lost because of the sheer power of industry. They had the money to fire 100 shells while we only fired 1. They were able to, you can afford to lose gear and get new ones quickly. No matter what, we could never beat this. We fought for a long time. The German prisoners of war who saw training exercises for American artillery in the U.S. saw for himself how well the system worked because of how well it was planned and how professionally it was run. American crews of artillery. They trained all the time, working on their coordination and communication skills so they could spend more time on target missions. Moving forward, observers worked closely with infantry units, practicing how to work together in a way that made American combined arms operations possible. It worked so well. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, the artillery officer who was caught in Italy, American artillery officers gave talks at a prisoner of war camp about how they did their jobs. His notes German archives hold records that show how much he admired his work. They have set up a system for everything we did based on our own skills and initiative. Where we relied on skilled artillery officers figured out how to fire people by using their experience and math to make tables that led average officers to achieve the same results. Where we depended on good radio operators maintaining communication under difficult conditions. They produced radios so reliable that even minimally trained operators could maintain contact. They have taken the art of artillery and transformed it into an industrial process, repeatable and scalable. This is the secret of their success. The transformation of German prisoners extended beyond technical appreciation. Many realized that German propaganda about American military weakness had been completely false. The Americans they encountered both as enemies on the battlefield and as captives in prison camps demonstrated professional competence, industrial capability, and organizational skill that exceeded German capabilities in nearly every dimension. Oberia writer Hans Müller, whose diary chronicled his experiences in the Ardennes, was captured during the collapse of the German offensive. His later diary entries, written in a prisoner of war camp, reflect a complete reversal of his earlier beliefs. We were told the Americans were inferior soldiers, that they lacked fighting spirit, that they depended on material superiority because they lacked the skill and courage of German soldiers. These were lies. American soldiers fought with courage and skill, but they also fought with overwhelming material advantages that German courage and skill could not overcome. Most significantly, they fought with an artillery system so advanced that we had no effective counter. This more than any other factor defeated us. By early 1945, as Germany's situation became hopeless, American artillery superiority only increased. German ammunition production collapsed under Allied bombing. German artillery units lost experienced crews to casualties and received inadequate replacements. German horses, essential for moving artillery, died by thousands from overwork, lack of fodder, and American fire. German batteries that had operated with 6 guns at the war's beginning now operated with 2 or 3. Some divisions had no functional artillery at all. American artillery, by contrast, grew stronger. Production continued to accelerate even as the war in Europe approached its end. American factories produced more artillery pieces in 1944 than in any previous year. Ammunition production reached levels that allowed American forces to fire without restriction. New technologies, including improved fire direction, computers, and better radios, enhanced effectiveness further. The end came in May 1945 with Germany's unconditional surrender. In the final battles, American artillery demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible just years earlier. Single battalions could deliver overwhelming firepower on demand. Multiple corps artillery could coordinate fire on area targets, saturating entire map grid squares with shells. Forward observers could call down destruction on any target within minutes, confident that accurate fire would arrive quickly. German survivors of these final battles carried with them profound respect for American artillery. Hedman Verrer Hoffman, the mathematics professor who had analyzed American firing tables, was captured in the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945. His final military report, written for American intelligence officers, provided professional analysis of American artillery effectiveness. The American artillery system represents the culmination of industrial-age warfare. They have applied industrial methods, mass production, standardization, and systematic training to create a weapon system of unprecedented effectiveness. Individual German artillery pieces may be superior in design. Individual German artillery officers may match American skill, but the Americans have created a system that does not depend on individual of being better. Their system produces consistent, overwhelming, rapidly delivered firepower regardless of individual skill levels. This systemization represents a revolution in warfare that Germany never matched and could not match given our industrial limitations. In the decades after the war, historians analyzing American military effectiveness in World War II identified artillery as perhaps the single most important advantage American 80s forces possessed. While tanks and aircraft received public attention, it was artillery that broke German attacks, supported American advances, and inflicted substantial casualties in the Western theater. German military professionals studying their defeat after the war consistently identified American artillery superiority as a decisive factor. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in his post-war analysis, "American artillery achieved what we believed impossible. They transformed artillery from a supporting arm into a dominant weapon system. Their coordination, their fire control, their logistics, and their industrial production created an artillery force that could not be matched or countered." German forces in the West operated under constant artillery threat, unable to mass without drawing devastating fire, unable to move without observation, unable to fight effectively under the weight of American shells. The tactical innovations developed by American artillery during World War II became the foundation for modern artillery doctrine. Time on target remains the standard method for coordinating artillery fires. Fire direction centers remain the hub of artillery operations. Forward observers closely integrated with maneuver forces remain essential for delivering responsive fire support. The basic structure established by the United States in World War II persists to this day. The proximity fuse represented such a significant advance that its full impact remained classified for years after the war. The psychological impact combined with the physical casualties often broke unit cohesion entirely. German soldiers caught in the open by VT-fused shells had no effective defense for the German soldiers who faced American artillery. The experience left permanent impressions. Stabsfeld Webel Kurt Zimmermann, who survived multiple toot barges during the Bulge, immigrated to the United States in the 1950s. In a 1960 interview, he reflected on his wartime experiences. "I have been asked what weapon I feared most during the war. Not tanks, though German tanks were inferior to late-war American tanks. Not aircraft, though American air power was overwhelming. Not even American infantry, though they fought well. The weapon I feared most, the weapon that gave me nightmares then, and sometimes still does today, was American artillery. The sudden, devastating fire that arrived without warning. The knowledge that you might die without ever seeing your enemy killed by shells fired from guns kilometers away. This was true terror. The story of German soldiers and American artillery is ultimately a story about the transformation of warfare in the industrial age. Individual courage and tactical skill remained important, but they were overshadowed by industrial production, systematic training, and organizational efficiency. The Americans had created a system that amplified the capabilities of two average soldiers, making them more effective than exceptional German soldiers fighting with inferior systems and inadequate support. The artillery that broke German forces in World War II was not the product of a single innovation or a brilliant individual. It was the product of systematic analysis, industrial application, comprehensive training, and abundant resources. It represented American military power at its most effective, using industrial capacity and organizational skill to create overwhelming combat power. For the German soldiers who faced this system, the experience was transformative. They entered the war believing in German superiority. They ended the war understanding that American industrial might and organizational capability had surpassed German capabilities. They had learned to fear American artillery above all other weapons, for it represented the unbridgeable gap between German methods and American.